June 6, 1944, 3:45 a.m. While 156,000 Allied soldiers prepare to storm the beaches of Normandy, Adolf Hitler sleeps soundly in his mountain retreat. In the next few hours, decisions made or not made in this room will determine the fate of Nazi Germany. What history has never fully revealed is what happened behind these closed doors when the news finally arrived, and why Hitler's initial reaction to the greatest invasion in history was not what anyone expected. The first reports reached German commanders at 1:30 a.m. Radar stations along the French coast are blinded by Allied jamming. Paratroopers begin dropping behind German lines. The largest amphibious invasion in human history has begun. Yet the man who holds absolute power over the German war machine remains unaware, sleeping in a room just down the hall from where his top officers wait, uncertain whether to wake him. What you are about to hear is not the sanitized version taught in history books. It's not the story of a dictator immediately springing into action. It's the truth about those critical first hours when Hitler's delusions, his sleeping habits, and his military misjudgments created a perfect storm that would change the course of World War II. This is the story of what Hitler really told his staff when D-Day began. At the Berghof, the atmosphere is tense. General Alfred Jodl, chief of the operations staff of the Armed Forces High Command, has received preliminary reports. He knows something significant is happening in France, but the full picture remains unclear. Should he wake the Führer? The question hangs in the air, heavy with consequence. To wake Hitler unnecessarily could mean his wrath. To delay could mean disaster. The decision is made. Hitler will not be disturbed. His personal physician, Dr. Theodor Morell, had given him sleeping pills the night before, a common occurrence. The man who controls the fates of millions is, at this critical moment, chemically incapacitated by his own insomnia. Meanwhile, along the Normandy coast, the German 7th Army under General Erich Marx faces the full fury of the Allied invasion. The beaches, codenamed Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword, are being pounded by naval artillery. German defenders, many of them Eastern Front veterans and conscripts from occupied territories, are caught completely by surprise. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the brilliant commander of Army Group B, responsible for defending the Atlantic Wall, is not in France. He is in Herrlingen, Germany, celebrating his wife's birthday. When news of the invasion reaches him at 6:30 a.m., he immediately realizes the gravity of the situation. This is not a diversionary attack, as some German commanders believe. This is the real thing. It is not until 10 a.m., over 8 hours after the invasion began, that Hitler is finally awakened. His adjutant, Colonel Nikolaus von Bülow, enters the room with cautious steps. The news is delivered with careful precision. The Allies have landed in force in Normandy. Hitler's reaction is not what you might expect. There is no panic, no shouting, no immediate flurry of orders. Instead, according to witnesses, he's calm, almost serene. "This is it," he reportedly says, "the invasion we've been waiting for. It couldn't have come at a better time." What Hitler tells his staff in the hours that follow reveals a mind trapped in its own strategic fantasy. "They've landed exactly where we wanted them to," he announces to his assembled commanders. "This is not their main effort. It's a diversion. The real invasion will come at Pas-de-Calais, and when it does, we will be ready to crush them." This belief that the Normandy landings are merely a feint has been carefully cultivated by Allied deception operations. Operation Fortitude, one of the most successful military deceptions in history, has convinced Hitler and his high command that the main invasion force is still waiting across the Channel, ready to strike at the narrowest point between England and France. The German commanders gathered around Hitler exchange uneasy glances. Some, like Jodl, share the Führer's assessment. Others, like General Gerd von Rundstedt, Commander-in-Chief West, have their doubts. But to contradict Hitler now would be career suicide, if not literally fatal. The weather is terrible, Hitler continues, pacing the room. Eisenhower would never launch his main invasion in these conditions. No, this is merely a secondary operation designed to draw our forces away from the real target. Hitler is partially right about the weather. Conditions are indeed marginal, so much so that Eisenhower had nearly postponed the invasion. But what Hitler fails to grasp is that the Allies, facing a narrow window of opportunity, have decided to proceed despite the risks. The most critical decision of the day involves the deployment of Germany's panzer reserves. Rommel, who had rushed back to France upon hearing the news, is requesting immediate release of these powerful armored divisions to crush the Allied beachhead before it can be established. But Hitler hesitates. Not yet, he tells his staff. We cannot commit our armor until we're certain this is the main invasion. The panzers must remain where they are until we see what develops at Pas-de-Calais. This delay, this hesitation born of Hitler's strategic misjudgment, will prove catastrophic. The hours and days lost, while German armor sits idle, will allow the Allies to establish and expand their beachhead, creating a foothold in France that will prove impossible to dislodge. By noon, as more reports stream in, Hitler's confidence only grows. Excellent, he declares, examining maps that show Allied forces contained in limited areas. They've walked right into our trap. The British and Americans will bleed themselves dry on our defenses, and when they've exhausted themselves, we will unleash our reserves and annihilate them. On the ground, the reality is different. While German defenses are indeed causing heavy casualties, particularly at Omaha Beach, where American forces face a nightmare of death and destruction, the sheer scale of the invasion is overwhelming. German units are being cut off, communications are failing, and Allied air superiority is making any daylight movement nearly impossible. Throughout the day, Hitler remains focused on his strategic vision. He sees not a disaster in the making, but an opportunity. The longer they remain in Normandy, he tells his staff, the weaker they become. Their supply lines will stretch, their reinforcements will be delayed, and their air superiority will mean less as they move further inland. We have them exactly where we want them. What Hitler tells his staff reveals a mind that has lost touch with battlefield reality. He speaks of strategic envelopments and decisive counterattacks that exist only in his imagination. He dismisses reports of Allied air superiority as exaggerated. He downplays the significance of Allied naval firepower, believing Germany's fortifications can withstand anything the enemy can throw at them. By the end of the week, he confidently predicts the Allies will be begging for terms. We will teach them the same lesson we taught the Russians at Stalingrad. The uncomfortable truth is that Germany has already lost Stalingrad. The once mighty Sixth Army has been destroyed, and the Eastern Front is collapsing under relentless Soviet pressure. The German war machine, stretched thin across multiple fronts, is running out of men, equipment, and fuel. As evening falls on June 16th, the situation in Normandy has stabilized, but not in Germany's favor. Despite heavy casualties, Allied forces have established a foothold on all 5 beaches. The German defenders, though fierce, are scattered and unable to mount a coordinated counterattack. That evening, Hitler meets with his inner circle again. The mood has shifted slightly. The reports from France are more troubling than initially believed, but Hitler remains unwavering in his strategic assessment. Everything is proceeding according to plan, he insists, though some of his commanders privately disagree. The Allies, have committed their reserves to Normandy. When the real invasion comes at Pas-de-Calais, we will be ready. This belief that the Normandy invasion is merely a diversion will persist for weeks. It will prevent Hitler from committing his full reserves to the critical battle in France. It will allow Allied forces to break out of Normandy in late July and begin the liberation of France. It will, in essence, seal Germany's fate. What history has often missed is that some of Hitler's commanders knew better. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, Commander-in-Chief West, reportedly told his staff on June 6, "If you don't like it, if you think you can do better, then go and do it yourself." His frustration with Hitler's strategic blindness was palpable, but his power to influence events was limited. What Hitler told his staff on D-Day reveals a leader increasingly detached from reality. His strategic vision had become a fantasy, his military judgment clouded by recent defeats and an unwillingness to accept contrary information. The absolute power he wielded had created an echo chamber where only his views mattered. The German High Command was trapped in a system that discouraged honest assessment. To challenge Hitler's assessment of the situation was to risk not just your career, but potentially your life. The result was a catastrophic failure of military decision-making at the very moment when Germany needed its clearest thinking. In the weeks that followed, Hitler's initial assessment of D-Day would prove disastrously wrong. The Normandy invasion was not a diversion, but the main Allied effort. The real invasion at Pas-de-Calais would never come. By the time Hitler finally accepted reality, it was too late. The Allies had broken out of Normandy and were advancing across France with alarming speed. What Hitler told his staff when D-Day began was not just wrong, it was catastrophically wrong. His strategic misjudgment, his unwillingness to listen to his commanders, his belief in his own infallibility. These factors combined to create a perfect storm that would accelerate Germany's defeat. The cost of this failure was measured in hundreds of thousands of lives, German and Allied soldiers, French civilians, and countless others caught in the maelstrom of war. The beaches of Normandy, once the scene of Hitler's strategic fantasy, became instead the stage for the beginning of the end of Nazi Germany. What Hitler told his staff when D-Day began reveals a truth about absolute power. It can blind even the most cunning strategist to reality. It can create a bubble of delusion so strong that even the most obvious facts cannot penetrate. In the case of D-Day, it cost Germany the war. Today, the beaches of Normandy stand as silent witnesses to history. The bunkers and fortifications that Hitler believed would stop the Allied invasion now serve as monuments to a failed strategy. The story of what Hitler told his staff when D-Day began is not just a tale of military misjudgment. It's a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power and the importance of listening to uncomfortable truths. The names carved into these memorial stones tell the real story of D-Day. Not the version Hitler told his staff, but the truth of what happened on those beaches and in those fields. They remind us that behind every strategic decision, every military assessment, every command given in a war room or bunker, there are human lives at stake. As the sun set on June 6, 1944, Hitler retired for the evening, still convinced that everything was proceeding according to his plan. He could not have known that this day, this invasion he had so completely misjudged, would mark the beginning of the end, not just for Nazi Germany, but for the 1,000-year Reich he had promised to build. The story of what Hitler told his staff when D-Day began is more than just a historical footnote. It's a window into the mind of a dictator at the height of his power, yet on the verge of catastrophic defeat. It's a reminder that even the most powerful leaders are not immune to self-deception, and that the consequences of their delusions can be measured in human lives. The veterans who survived D-Day carry with them not just memories of combat, but the knowledge that they were part of something historic, something that changed the course of the war and the shape of the world to come. Their stories, their memories, their sacrifices stand as the ultimate rebuttal to what Hitler told his staff on that fateful day. As the sun sets on the beaches of Normandy, casting long shadows across the sand, we are reminded that history is not just made in the halls of power or the war rooms of dictators. It is made on beaches and in fields, by ordinary people doing extraordinary things in the face of overwhelming odds. What Hitler told his staff when D-Day began was not just a military assessment. It was a worldview, a fantasy, a delusion that would soon come crashing down around him. The mountain retreat, where he slept through the critical hours of the invasion, still stands, but the 1,000-year Reich he promised to build exists only in the pages of history. The ruins of the Berghof today serve as a physical reminder of the impermanence of power and the ultimate triumph of reality over delusion. What Hitler told his staff when D-Day began mattered less than what history would ultimately tell about the man who led Germany to disaster. The wreaths laid on the beaches of Normandy each year honor not just the memory of those who fell, but the values for which they fought: freedom, democracy, and the belief that even the most powerful dictator can be defeated when ordinary people unite against tyranny. The maps that Hitler studied so carefully on June 6, 1944, told him what he wanted to believe, not what was actually happening. The reality on the ground in Normandy was different, and no amount of strategic fantasy could change that. The children who play today on the beaches of Normandy are living proof that the world Hitler envisioned never came to pass. Their laughter, their freedom, their futures stand as the ultimate rebuttal to what Hitler told his staff when D-Day began. The inscriptions on the memorials that dot the Normandy coastline speak not of Hitler's delusions, but of the sacrifice and courage of those who fought and died to liberate Europe. They remind us that history is written not by the powerful in their bunkers and retreats, but by ordinary people who do extraordinary things in extraordinary times. What Hitler told his staff when D-Day began reveals a fundamental truth about power. It can isolate even the most intelligent leader from reality. The echo chamber of absolute power can become a prison of delusion, with consequences measured in human lives. Today, the Normandy coastline stands as a living memorial to those who fought and died on D-Day. The beaches that once saw the bloodiest fighting in modern history now welcome visitors from around the world who come to remember, to learn, and to honor the sacrifice that changed the course of history. The faces of D-Day veterans, etched with the passage of time, still carry the memory of what happened on those beaches in June 1944. Their stories, their memories, their experiences stand as the ultimate testimony to the reality that prevailed over Hitler's delusion. As Hitler looked out from his mountain retreat on the evening of June 6, 1944, still convinced that everything was proceeding according to his plan, he could not have known that this day would be remembered not as the beginning of his great victory, but as the beginning of the end of the regime he had built. The Normandy American Cemetery, with its rows of white crosses and stars of David, stands as a silent rebuke to what Hitler told his staff when D-Day began. Each grave represents a life given in the cause of freedom, a sacrifice made to ensure that the delusions of dictators would never again threaten the peace of the world. The waves that wash ashore on the beaches of Normandy today are the same waves that carried Allied soldiers to victory on June 6, 1944. They serve as a constant reminder that nature itself bears witness to history and that the tides of time wash away even the most powerful delusions. The German officers who heard Hitler's confident pronouncements on D-Day were caught in a terrible dilemma. to speak the truth and risk their lives, or to remain silent and watch disaster unfold. Their discomfort, their hesitation, their ultimate failure to challenge Hitler's delusion would cost Germany dearly. The memorial ceremonies held each year on the beaches of Normandy honor not just the memory of those who fell, but the values for which they fought: freedom, democracy, and the belief that even the most powerful dictator can be defeated when ordinary people unite against tyranny. The medals worn by D-Day veterans today are not just symbols of personal bravery. They are testaments to the collective courage of a generation that faced down evil and prevailed. Each medal represents a story of sacrifice, of service, and of the triumph of freedom over tyranny. As the sun sets on the beaches of Normandy, casting long shadows across the sand, we are reminded that history is not just made in the halls of power or the war rooms of dictators. It is made on beaches and in fields by ordinary people doing extraordinary things in the face of overwhelming odds. And it is in their sacrifice that we find the truest measure of that day, not in the forgotten words of a man trapped in his own fatal fantasy. To understand the weight of their choice is to understand the cost of freedom